Why does no one mention this in history books? Imagine being the son of Henry VIII, heir to one of the most powerful thrones in Europe, pampered in silk, spoon-fed by trembling servants, and told your destiny is to rule. Yet within a few short years, you're dead in a way so chilling that even your father's notorious cruelty seems merciful in comparison. They say Henry VIII executed wives and enemies alike. But what if I told you that his most spoiled son met a death so strange, so hidden in the shadows of Tudor records, that even Henry VIII himself may have feared what it meant for the future of his bloodline? You've heard the tales of Henry VIII and his many wives, but almost no one talks about the tragic, suspicious end of the son he loved most. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear will change how you see the Tudors forever. This story isn't a random internet myth. It comes from letters hidden in the British Library from the dusty pages of physicians' diaries who attended the Tudor court, and from court records quietly revised after the boy's death documents that scholars often skip, but that paint a portrait far darker than any sanitized textbook. According to the household accounts of Prince Edward's chambers, thousands of pounds were spent on rare concoctions and elixirs as he wasted away, while whispers of witchcraft and ill omens began to haunt the halls of Hampton Court. One eyewitness, the Spanish ambassador, wrote that what happened to Henry VIII's son was like a curse visited upon the house of Tudor. And yet, few people ever ask, was it truly tuberculosis, as the official records claim? Or was there something far more sinister? Something that even Henry VIII's iron fist could not control? If you watch this video until the end, you will uncover a side of Tudor history that most history books leave out: a tale of rival factions, eerie medical practices, and a death that may have been no accident. Because this is more than just the story of a dying prince. It is the story of what happens when a dynasty built on blood meets something it cannot fight. And it all starts with the birth of the boy who was never meant to die young. Imagine the halls of Hampton Court, that night torchlight flickering against the tapestries, midwives running with hot water, and Henry VIII's heavy footsteps pacing as he waited for a son he had nearly torn his kingdom apart to have. Jane Seymour, Henry's third wife, was the only one to give him what he wanted most: a male heir. But as classified Tudor accounts hint, the price for a male heir was steep. Jane Seymour died just days later, her body drained, leaving the infant Edward surrounded by mourning even before he could open his eyes to see his kingdom. They say the king wept the iron-hearted Henry VIII, crying over the child who would inherit his throne. But even in his joy, the court physicians noted something unusual in the records. The child is small, of pale complexion, and slow to cry. Lungs seem weak. He tires easily. Astrological omens are unfavorable. These notes were not in the official christening documents, but in the private diaries of court physicians, preserved in the grey pages of the Welcome collection and in letters between ambassadors, who described Edward as frail despite his father's declarations of strength. At this time, Europe was gripped by fear of omens. Henry VIII's court consulted astrologers in secret, asking about the future of the child. According to a letter from the French ambassador, the astrologer predicted the child will rule. But briefly, and under a shadow, That shadow would grow as Edward's childhood progressed. Despite grand public images of the boy riding horses and holding a sword behind closed doors, court letters reveal he was frequently ill, prone to fevers that would come and go, and episodes of severe coughing. But the court was determined to protect the image of the perfect Tudor heir. Every illness was downplayed in the official chronicles, but the bills for the apothecaries told the true story. Rare herbs imported at immense cost, potions brewed at night, and foreign physicians called in under cover of darkness. People often imagine Edward as a spoiled prince, pampered beyond measure, and it's true. He had the finest tutors, a room filled with toys, and servants to cater to his every whim. But the classified diaries hint that he was more a pawn than a prince. The Duke of Somerset, Edward's uncle, began consolidating power almost immediately, ensuring that if Edward remained frail, the council would rule in his name. Some even say the boy's health was convenient for those who surrounded him, making him an icon they could control rather than a king who could truly rule. One letter from a Spanish diplomat hints the child's weakness is much spoken of, but those who gain from it have little interest in strengthening him. Though the chronicles say Edward's early years were unremarkable, historians now question, why? Were there so many foreign physicians present, yet their visits were unrecorded in the official accounts? Why did Edward spend so many days in seclusion, even when rumors of plague were not present? Why do private letters mention a night cough and black phlegm, symptoms not recorded in the public chronicles? It is said that Henry VIII himself ordered these details to remain hidden, fearing that his fragile legacy would be questioned if word of his son's condition spread. After all, the Tudor dynasty was built on a claim of strength, and weakness could mean war. But this was only the beginning, because while Edward's early life was marked by frailty, what happened as he grew older would challenge the very stability of England. In the next section, we will open a confidential court dossier describing the strange medical treatments forced upon Edward, the rumors of witchcraft and poisoning, and the political vultures who circled his sick waiting for him to die. If you think his death was just a matter of illness, wait until you see what they did to keep him alive. I remember the boy when he was small, a thin creature with bright, watery eyes, but always with a clever tongue. Lady Margaret's trembling voice recalls. But it was in the winter of 1552 that she saw the heir of Henry VIII truly begin to waste away. He coughed at night, long and harsh, until the sheets were spotted with blood. We burned the linens before dawn so no one would speak of it. The official record would later state that Edward fell ill with a fever and consumption, but Lady Margaret's testimony, smuggled out in a private letter to a distant cousin, tells another story. It was not only the sickness that took him, it was what they did to him in the name of healing. Imagine it, the flicker of candlelight against stone walls, the boy, pale and shivering, propped up on pillows while physicians poured thick, bitter potions down his throat, muttering Latin prayers. Outside the chamber, the Duke of Northumberland whispered with his allies, calculating their future power. In the kitchens, servants spoke of witches in the night and omens of death. Lady Margaret described how Edward would grasp her hand, begging not to be bled again. terrified of the leeches and knives that brought him more pain than relief. And at the heart of it all was Henry VIII's unfulfilled legacy, a kingdom that depended on the survival of this single, frail boy. Even as this smell of sickness grew too strong to ignore, it is said that Edward's death was natural, that the disease took him despite all efforts to save him. But what if the very treatments meant to heal him hastened his death? Eyewitness accounts from chamber servants reveal that Edward was subjected to repeated bleedings, up to 3 times a week. Despite his weakness, physicians purged him with harsh concoctions, some containing mercury, in an attempt to cleanse his humors. A French ambassador wrote privately that Edward's skin turned yellow in his final months, his eyes sunken, and that he could scarcely draw breath without trembling. Yet the physicians continued, driven by desperation, superstition, and fear of being blamed for the prince's decline. Some historians argue that Edward's illness was indeed tuberculosis, as the official record claims, but others, piecing together the fragments of letters and hidden testimonies, point to mercury poisoning, the side effect of repeated Tudor treatments for fevers and consumption. Others whisper of a darker possibility, deliberate poisoning. It is said that factions within the court stood to gain immensely from Edward's death. The Duke of Northumberland, who pushed for Lady Jane Grey to inherit the throne, Catholic sympathizers, who wished to see Mary Tudor replace the sickly Protestant king, even foreign agents who feared a stable Protestant England under Edward's reign. Though no definitive proof has ever surfaced, the speed and pattern of Edward's decline, paired with the secrecy surrounding his treatments, leave open a question that echoes through the centuries. Was Edward truly just sick, or was he held to long to the grave? When Edward finally died on the 6th of July 1553, witnesses said the air in his chamber was so foul it was difficult to breathe. His last words, according to some accounts, were, "Lord, deliver me," though others claim he died in silence, eyes open, staring at the canopy above his bed. Lady Margaret, who had watched over him since infancy, was quietly dismissed from court, her testimony hidden away. It would be years before her private letters were uncovered in an old chest, hinting at the horror of those final months. And so the death of Henry VIII's only legitimate son, the center of Tudor hope, was closed with quiet haste. His body was interred quickly, with the official cause marked as consumption, and the council moved swiftly to secure the succession. But in the shadows, whispers continued that a prince meant to rule had been sacrificed by those who would rule in his place. But what if the tragedy of Edward's death wasn't the end of the curse on the Tudors? In the next section, we will examine a historical hypothesis dossier claiming that Edward's strange symptoms may have been the first sign of a blood curse cast on Henry VIII's line, tying together the misfortunes of Edward, Mary, and Elizabeth in a chilling pattern of decline. If you thought Edward's story was tragic, wait until you discover the theory that a single, hidden event sealed the fate of the Tudor dynasty forever. It is a theory whispered in corners of dusty archives and hinted at in letters between Tudor courtiers, that the house of Tudor, established in blood and betrayal, was cursed from its inception, and that this curse found its sharpest expression in the slow, painful death of Edward VI. According to folklore recorded in the diaries of Lady Agnes Bowes, a midwife who served at the birth of Henry VIII, a Welsh wise woman was said to have uttered, "Ye have stolen the crown, and blood shall steal it back, one child at a time." This curse was reportedly placed when Henry VII seized the crown at Bosworth, and those who believe it say its signs appeared across the Tudor line stillbirths, frailty, mental decline, and unexplained illness. Edward VI's strange illness and rapid decline, some believe, was not just sickness or court intrigue, but the inevitable payment of a blood debt. Imagine the growing fear within the Tudor palaces. Elizabeth, daughter of Anne Boleyn, narrowly survived smallpox, leaving her face scarred and her life hanging in the balance. Mary Tudor suffered phantom pregnancies, her belly swelling with hope, only to end in emptiness, leaving her sobbing behind locked doors. Edward, the miracle child of Henry VIII, pampered and protected, dying slowly at 15 as his body wasted away. It is said that when Elizabeth was informed of Edward's death, she remained silent, her face pale, before whispering, "The price is paid, but not yet in full," though this quote remains unverified. It captures the dread that permeated the Tudor courts, an unspoken fear that they were living under a dark cloud, an inheritance far worse than any political threat. Modern historians often dismiss the notion of a Tudor curse, but a few medical historians have raised a different angle. What if the Tudors carried a genetic condition that caused the mysterious illnesses and deaths across the family line? Some suggest Kell blood group incompatibility, which could explain the multiple stillbirths and infant deaths among Henry's children. Others point to tuberculosis, a slow killer that could have passed silently through the line. Another hypothesis suggests porphyria, which causes severe pain, mental disturbances, and weakness, aligning with accounts of Henry VI, from whom the Tudors descended, and potentially Edward's. Symptoms. Yet, the symptoms Edward displayed: night sweats, cough, wasting, and potential mercury poisoning do not align perfectly with a single condition, maintaining the air of mystery that feeds the curse hypothesis. What feeds this theory further is the pattern of secrecy. Edward's body was buried with haste, and the council discouraged public viewing. Reports of blackened fingernails and teeth, possibly indicating poisoning or severe infection, were omitted from official records. The speed with which the council moved to secure Jane Grey's succession suggests they had prepared for Edward's death well before it was officially imminent. Though there is no hard proof of a curse, the dossier compiles circumstantial fragments that suggest the Tudors were marked, whether by genetic fate, political betrayal, or something older and darker that defies the clean lines of academic history. Edward's death triggered a brief succession crisis, leading to Lady Jane Grey's execution, Mary's vengeful rise, and Elizabeth's cautious rule under constant threat of plots. But the price of maintaining power was steep. Mary's phantom pregnancies led to deep paranoia and personal despair. Elizabeth's refusal to marry was seen by some as fear of continuing the cursed bloodline. The Tudor line ended with Elizabeth's death, childless, in 1603, closing the dynasty in silence. Despite all the theories, no definitive cause has ever been confirmed for Edward's death, The Tudor blood curse remains, an intersection of folklore and history, a theory that explains what clean history books do not, a reminder that power often comes at a price no one can fully see. But if Edward's death marked the curse upon the Tudors, what happened to the physicians who treated him, and what did they record in their private, coded diaries about the final hours of Henry VIII's son? Or something else entirely? In the next section, we will open the hidden journals of Dr. Owen and Dr. Simmons, the two physicians who attended Edward, to reveal shocking details of his last day, details that might finally answer whether Edward's death was truly natural. If you thought the curse was just folklore, the final testimony of Edward's doctors may change your mind forever. Extract, Private Journal of Drive, OWEN coded entry, translated June 30th, 1553. The prince is failing. His cough deepens. The black phlegm persists. I fear the bleedings do no good. But the council insists. July 2nd, 1553. The boy's skin is yellowing. He calls for water often, but his lips crack when he drinks. He says she is standing in the corner, waiting. The air is thick with the scent of sickness. His eyes dart around the chamber at shadows we cannot see. July 5th, 1553. At night he whispers of his mother, Jane Seymour, whom he never knew. July 6th, 1553. It is done. These words written in a small hurried script hidden beneath a layer of coded shorthand were discovered centuries later among Dr. Owen's effects locked away in a chest beneath floorboards, suggesting the physician feared for his life should these details become known. It was the 6th of July, 1553. Inside Edward's chamber, the air was oppressive, candles flickering as if choked by the scent of sickness and stale sweat, according to Dr. Simmons, who kept his own private notes. In the margins of a psalter, Edward awoke that morning in pain so severe he could scarcely move. He cried out that his bones burned, that his breath rattled in his chest. When we opened the window, he begged us to close it, saying the cold wind brought dark figures. As the physicians approached, Edward reportedly clutched at the sheets, his thin arms trembling. He was just 15, yet he looked like a frail old man, hollowed by disease or something else. Imagine the fear in that room. Edward gasping. The room lit by wavering candlelight. Courtiers waiting outside, silent, pressing ears to the heavy doors. The distant toll of bells, heard only by the dying boy, who reportedly asked, "Are they ringing for me?" Dr. Owen's notes reveal he tried to administer a final potion, a dark liquid containing herbs and mercury, meant to clear the lungs. Edward struggled to swallow, the liquid dribbling down his chin. The room fell silent as Edward's breathing slowed, each breath like a knife in his chest. These journals confirm a dark reality of Tudor medicine. The cures often contained toxins we now know to be deadly. Mercury, used in treatments for fevers, could cause organ failure and madness, bleeding weakened patients already near death, increasing infection risks. Yet Dr. Owen's final notes hint at something more chilling. Council insists on more purge. Against my advice, I fear we hasten what we should delay. Some interpret this as fear of political pressure. The council, aware of Edward's imminent death, needed him alive long enough to secure paperwork for Jane Grey's succession, yet weak enough to control. Others believe it hints at deliberate overtreatment to speed his death. The hidden journals record Edward's symptoms in detail: persistent cough with dark sputum, tuberculosis or severe pneumonia, yellowing skin, possible liver failure, mercury poisoning, delirium and visions fever, poisoning, or psychological trauma. Dr. Simmons noted Edward's hands turned black at the fingertips in his final hours, a sign that could indicate sepsis, advanced tuberculosis, or heavy metal poisoning. Historians remain divided. Was Edward killed by illness alone, compounded by Tudor medicine? Was he helped toward death by those who stood to gain from his passing? His body was prepared quickly, the details of his condition hidden beneath heavy funeral robes. What remains is the eerie silence of the room as Edward took his final breath, surrounded not by family, but by physicians and political agents. Within 9 days, she would be imprisoned. Mary Tudor would seize the crown, leading to the Marian persecutions. Elizabeth would watch in silence, learning how quickly a throne could slip away. Their existence is a reminder that even kings and heirs die in silence, their final moments controlled by those around them. Minutes after Edward's death, the council sealed the room. Servants were sworn to secrecy. The hidden journals note that the council took Dr. Owen and Dr. Simmons aside, warning them to speak only of consumption should questions arise. Days later, Lady Jane Grey was proclaimed queen, and so the death of Henry VIII's son, so eagerly awaited at his birth, was closed with a whisper, the truth buried under coded entries and rotting tapestries. The hidden journals of Dr. Owen and Dr. Simmons were never intended for public eyes. Their existence is a reminder that even kings and heirs die in silence, their final moments controlled by those around them. Was Edward the victim of Tudor medicine, political manipulation, or the curse whispered across the dynasty's bloodline? To this day, no historian can say for certain, and the exact cause of Edward's death remains one of the Tudor era's most chilling mysteries. But even in death, Edward's story was not over. In the next section, we will explore how his ghost was rumored to haunt Hampton Court, and how sightings of a pale boy clutching his chest in the corridors terrified servants for generations, feeding the legend that Edward's spirit never found peace. If you thought the story ended with his burial, you haven't heard the ghostly aftermath that still echoes through the cold stone halls of the Tudors. Archive. Hampton Court Ghost LOG file #Edward Haunting Incident Report Date October 1601A. Boy, pale and thin, seen near the Chapel Royal, clutching at his chest, eyes hollow. When approached, he vanishes, leaving only the scent of damp linen. Years after Edward VI was laid to rest, servants at Hampton Court began to whisper of a ghost. When the boy tried to follow, the ghost turned, its eyes empty, before fading into the darkness. They described a thin boy, dressed in a nightshirt, wandering the shadowed halls, clutching his chest, gasping for breath. A stable boy claimed he saw the figure near the old nursery, pacing back and forth as if unable to find peace. Another servant swore she heard coughing late at night. Outside the Queen's chambers, harsh, rattling coughs, followed by a child's quiet weeping. Imagine the chill that would crawl across your skin as you cleaned the corridors at dawn, only to see a pale shape, clutching at its ribs, looking at you with eyes that seemed to beg for help. Edward, the boy king who died too young, still trapped in the halls where he suffered. Forever a prisoner of a throne he never ruled. Some said it was God's punishment on the Tudors, that the sins of Henry VIII and the blood spilled for the crown left Edward's soul restless, unable to move on. Others whispered it was a warning that the Tudor legacy was cursed, and that Edward's spirit walked as a reminder that even the power of kings cannot escape death. Hauntings in Tudor England were not just ghost stories, they were seen as omens. Before Elizabeth's illness in 1562, servants reported seeing Edward's ghost in the chapel, kneeling in prayer. In 1588, before the Spanish Armada threatened England, a guard swore he saw Edward's pale form near the Thames Gate. Before Elizabeth's death in 1603, rumors spread that Edward's spirit had been seen standing at the foot of her bed. Though dismissed officially, private letters among courtiers referenced the boy in white as a sign that trouble was coming. Skeptics argue these sightings were shadows, fevered dreams, or the creaks of old wood. But records from Hampton Court's internal logs indicate the consistent nature of these sightings. Always a thin, coughing boy, always near the chapel, nursery, or Edward's former quarters, always around moments of crisis or royal illness. Some have speculated that the sightings were psychological manifestations of guilt and fear, echoes of the rushed decisions made at Edward's deathbed. Yet, others believe the Tudor blood curse did not end with Edward's last breath, binding his spirit to the palace as a warning that the price of power was never fully paid. Even after the Tudor dynasty ended with Elizabeth's death, reports of Edward's ghost did not stop. Visitors to Hampton Court in the 1700s and 1800s claimed to hear coughing at night in empty halls, or saw the shape of a boy walking ahead, only to turn a corner and vanish in modern times. Paranormal investigators have recorded unexplained cold spots in Edward's chambers and the sound of faint coughing on nights when the palace is empty. Tour guides still speak of Edward's corridor, and some visitors report feeling a heaviness in their chest while passing through, just for a moment before it lifts. Was Edward's ghost truly walking the halls of Hampton Court? Or is it the collective memory of a child king who died too young, carrying the weight of a father's ambition, a kingdom's fear, and the unending question, did Edward ever truly rest in peace? You've just uncovered a side of Henry VIII's legacy that textbooks rarely mention: a son born into power, but consumed by sickness, secrets, and possibly a curse that followed him even in death. His story is a reminder that behind the grand portraits of kings and queens lie shadows, stories of children caught in the machinery of power and the echoes they leave behind. If you want to uncover more hidden mysteries like the chilling fate of Edward VI, watch our next video on the Forgotten Army. What really happened to Rome's Ninth Legion? Where we explore another historical disappearance that has puzzled scholars for centuries. And if you felt the cold shadow of history while watching, like and subscribe, so you never miss the dark truths that hide behind the stories we think we know. Because history is never truly dead, it just waits for us to look closer.